John, when we open, camera 1 ought to be on the 4 shot.
Right.
What lens do you have up there?
Wide angle, Bob.
Good.
Coming through. Watch the boom, please. Don't forget
Camera 2, Joel, will be on the closest, right?
Right.
Drive it level, please.
All right, quiet, please. Now, gentlemen, we need a level on the voices. Just identify yourselves and tell us where you're from.
My name is Edgar Dale from Ohio State University.
I'm Marshall McLuhan from the University of Toronto.
I'm Gilbert Seldes, from the Annenberg School of Communications at the University of Pennsylvania.
And I'm Keith Tyler from Ohio State University.
That's good. Thank you.
All right, let's take it. Camera ready?
Raise the mic a little.
Camera's ready.
Okay, camera's ready.
Sound ready?
Sounds okay.
Quiet, please. This will be a take. Roll it.
Rolling. Speed.
Communications revolution. Scene 1, take 1.
Action.
We're going to discuss here for a while this whole matter of the communications revolution. And I suppose by this we mean the fact that in the last few decades we've had the great rise of the modern media, so-called, radio, television, motion pictures, and they've had a profound impact upon our American civilization and, in fact, all of Western civilization. You did a nice job the other day, Mr. Seldes, in kind of delineating what is involved in this, and I think this might be a very good way of beginning.
I think what you have in mind is a reference I made to the variety of scholars who are approaching the field, and I was trying, and still am trying, to assure myself that we're more or less talking about the same subject. I think we are in this sense that while you have an approach from a sociologist or a philologist or any number of ologists to the subject, we're on one side, we're all trying to find out what is the nature of the new communications? What is the special nature of each one of the media, such as, say, the moving picture or broadcasting? What is the nature of all of them, all of the mass media, as we call them, put together? And I think that from that, almost everybody in the field certainly isn't satisfied with stopping, deciding what is the essence. We're not Platonists. I think we all then want to say, what do all these media do to us? And then I put my own specialty in, what do we do about that? Now, I don't think I differ too much from you, Mr. McLuhan.
No, I've learned a great deal from your own work, Mr. Seldes, and you were in this field before any of us. And we've toiled along in your footsteps, as it were.
You and I share, however, I'm pretty sure share an enthusiasm for someone else, which is Harold Innis, the Canadian economist.
Yes.
Don't you think that he phrased the essence, really, of the revolution in, you probably know the actual words that he used, of the connection between an enormous change in the means of communication and a change following in society.
You know, McLuhan, you might do what I've known you to do, which is to characterize the former period as the print period and the present period as the electronic period, and kind of point out what sharp distinctions you think are involved.
I think one of the things that happens when a new medium comes on the scene, you become aware of the basic characteristics of older media in a way that you were not when they were the only things around. I think we're becoming more aware now of what print is than we were before. Radio seems to have acquired more sense of its own identity since television, and movies likewise. So there's a great advantage in one way in this revolution brought on by a new medium in revealing some of the earlier features of older media, making them more intelligible and more useful, giving us more sense of control over them and so on.
Which is to say that when we get into this electronic period, we don't give up the print man.
No, it would seem natural that older forms are put to new uses and discover new roles. The book, for example, in our time has discovered many new functions that it never had 50 or 100 years ago. It has become very powerfully directed toward teaching people how to learn other things besides books, how to learn arts of many kinds. The book has taken on a vast new function as a means of informing people, directing people's skills in many, many areas.
Mr. McLuhan, you've sometimes spoken about print as linear. Now, Suzanne Langer, in her book, Psychology in a New Key, speaks of discursive and non-discursive communication. How would you fit this into that scheme that she has developed?
Well, I think people who are subjected to the arrangement of language visually in lines, highly sequential and precise, rigid, develop habits of arranging their lives, arranging their whole social existence, which are very closely geared to these forms. They're not specially aware of this. Lineality, though, is not characteristic of radio or television or movies. And so we have been subjected to tremendous new forces, new influences, which have broken up the older habits acquired from the print world.
Would you say we tend to think in straight lines until we break away from?
We still like to speak of following a person or
Yes,
drawing conclusions in lines.
Yes.
And I don't follow you, or I do follow you, sort of thing. It does suggest, yes, that we think of thought itself.
But notice our contemporary phrase, I dig you.
This is closer, surely, to the medium of television, which, incidentally, has had the strange effect on the young of driving them to the libraries to ask for fact books. The librarians report there's a tremendous new taste in the young for fact books, not fiction.
I'd like to get at
Now,
one...
well, I mean, I was thinking the fact book is a thing that you have to dig. You don't read it in a line at just a story level on a single plane. You have to dig a fact book.
Yeah.
And the youngsters today dig their reading. They read in depth.
But in a sense, you're saying that one of the characteristics of this revolution is that people are with things. That is to say, we are communicated with so much more rapidly that we are with the events rather than linearly learning about them afterward, event by event.
But not a merely descriptive or narrative relation or mere point of view relation. You see, if you have a point of view, you're not really with a situation. You have already abstracted an angle, an aspect as yours. In the new situation, being with it, you don't have a point of view. You merely identify at all levels, your whole being.
Well, are you saying that photography and these new arts are more primitive, that we need to abstract less with these new media?
I think the word primitive is misleading, perhaps, but it does suggest people who are less in the habit of abstracting single aspects, single levels, and so on, and who are accustomed to a more inclusive, totally sensuous commitment to situations.
But then, McLuhan, picking up Mr. Dale's primitive, indications are that we will have a less sophisticated general public. You said when you're with it, you no longer need to have a point of view. Well, this is the complaint that's being made. People do not have their own points of view, their own specific individual approaches of things. It has been said, indeed, the mass media have that effect because we all see the same thing and so forth. You are implying there's something in their own nature that reinforces this.
Yes.
So that when I mentioned the Innes principle, there's a shift, there's a change, the social change that comes as a result of new means of communication. I find the implication of what you say is that it's not going to be a change in favor, shall we say, of the intellect per se.
Well,
Will we have less intelligent
no.
people?
For example, this being with it, for example, is very characteristic of dialogue. In dialogue with somebody else, you are not maintaining a fixed point of view. You are interchanging, you are interpenetrating, modifying the point of view of each is modified by the dialogue itself.
Yes.
You do not hold a fixed point of view, which you do in an article in a magazine or a book. You see, this is natural. You set up.
You are saying that that when I'm watching a television show, and I'm speaking now of an entertainment television show, that I'm in some way engaged in it, and I'm with it, and am I engaging in a dialogue with whatever's going on in front of me?
The character of the television image, I think it fosters this kind of participation simply because it is a rather poor image, and it involves the viewer in a great deal of completion of the detail that is missing visually in that image. The act of seeing television is very much that participation, as in reading a detective story where you are very much with it, precisely because you were not given a very much narrative information. You have to fill it in.
I'd like to suggest that this makes the job of the intellectual a good deal harder, because he is with all of these events. He's got consciously to withdraw from them if he's going to have any time for reflection, for interpretation, and indeed for leadership. Otherwise, he's just a part of everything as it goes on, and he never really has time to bring out what the essence of it is.
But I wonder, too, if these photographic processes, these new processes, aren't leading people again back to print. I've heard persons say, for example, well, take Life magazine. They started out, first of all, with a tremendous amount of photographs and shifted to more print. Is it possible, Mr. Tyler, that radio has caused, or devices such as this, has caused people really to read better?
Well, I think certainly all these media interrelate to the extent to which they are used consciously. One of the difficulties, of course, you mentioned radio. This is a hard one because radio is so much used today as a kind of a background for other activities,
Yes,
rather than
for
being
study
used
especially.
direct. Yes, for
The young.
study.
Yeah.
And busy people use radio very often as a kind of a background for a lot of things that they have to do anyway.
Radio actually eliminates the noises or deadens the noises of the family so the children can study by it. I know this happened a long time ago. Happened before I think I was aware of all the implications. Precisely of that, I'd like you, McLuhan, to go a little further, as I was rather superficial about Innes's theory of the change that follows.
His notion that any change in handling information, communication, is bound to cause a great readjustment of all the social patterns, the educational patterns, the sources and conditions of political power, public opinion patterns will change. But he got onto that track rather interestingly. You see, as an economic historian, he had been studying railways and the cod fisheries, the fur trade, and the pulp and paper. And he moved then from staples as forms of shaping economic life to media as staples. And he began to study the new media as really basic economic resources. And much as, for example, cotton in the South has shaped a whole culture, now radio is shaping a global culture. It's global in the extent of its resource availability. So that what would appear to be in the offing is a global culture conformable to a staple like radio, as the Southern culture was conformable to cotton.
But then he went on. The simple example that after print came in, the whole feudal system broke.
Yes.
Now, what I'm worried about, and he didn't live long enough to predict it even, is what is going to break? Where is the shift in power going to be at the present time?
The tremendous developments that we made in individual, private habits of study, isolated effort, inner direction, and so on, these are likely to take the rap from media that are so inclusive of the whole of society and at all levels. Think of the tremendous shift in political power that is going on at this moment through the use of television in politics.
Well, now, I really wonder about that. I have, in the past 30 years, observed only one demagogue using the visual medium. That was Huey Long in movies. I'm told that he was very good in radio when he would start a talk. He would say, friends, I'm not going to say anything of importance for the next minute and a half. You get on the telephone and call up a couple of friends and get them to listen to this program. There was a very clever demagogic use, but the only time he scared me was when I saw him in movies in a newsreel, when I thought he really had the power.
McCarthy folded in a week after he went on television. If Huey Long had gone on the TV, he would have been a flop at once. TV will not take a sharp character, a hot character. It's a cool medium. And our politics are being cooled off to the point of rigor mortis, according to many people.
I want to do it. Why not?
The nature of this medium, which calls for so much participation, does not give you a completed package, a completed image. You have to make your image as you go. Therefore, if the person who comes in front of the TV camera is already a very complete and classifiable type of person, a politician, a highly obvious doctor type, lawyer type, the medium rejects him because there's nothing left for the audience to view or to complete. And they say, this guy's a phony. There's something wrong with this guy.
I'd like to have you react to this notion that since the founding of our country, we've had the balance of power progressively go from a very small group that were voting, and had property rights and so on, gradually spread to a larger and larger group. Now, how does television fit into this? We have practically universal television as far as it being in the homes of concerned. Does this mean that the power more and more is flowing really to the popular group?
Yes,
to the masses?
literally the participation of the whole population in the political process becomes very deep. And whereas it's no longer a question of assessing arguments, platforms, regional flashes, and so on, everybody is with it.
You sure it's deep?
All age groups. Yes, the issues are no longer given to you on single planes and single patterns. They're total.
But this is a very good point about being deep. Is this actually a kind of a pseudo-event? I mean, you think you are with reality, but really, you are having prepared for you on television those aspects they want you to see, which gives you a feeling of participation you may not really have.
The audience is making a new form of association among its own members. They are making a new reality,
In other words,
new art form.
You don't think we're learning more things superficially?
No.
You don't?
No, this is an age in which in the new criticism or psychology or anything else, the word used in all these forms is depth. It's
Yes, I know.
reading in depth, psychology in depth, everything now
But
is in depth.
these are the relatively few experts and outsiders.
No.
Your implication now is, it seems to be the opposite of what you were saying a few minutes ago. And I'm not trying to trap you, Marshall. I'm trying to find out. But at one point, is my understanding that the thing we need to be troubled about by these mass media is their creation of the non-individualistic person, the man who is with it, so he's with what everyone is doing, to use what is now the hackneyed word, the conforming person. On the other side, you were saying that, however, television can be used to convey information in depth, and the implication is it can actually be used to make people think.
The forms of entertainment that work best on television, whether it's Padishevsky or even the Power Show, are ones which admit of a great deal of casualness, in which people can be introduced and dialogued with in the presence of the camera at all sorts of levels of their lives. You capture them at all sorts of strange and offbeat moments of their existence. And this kind of probing and peeling off the superficial aspects of people and so on is normal to this medium. It is a depth medium. The movie medium is, by comparison, very much a photographic slick package medium, which gives you a very highly defined and a very slick, complete package.
But I still want to go back to a question I asked earlier, which is, that with this feeling of being with everything, isn't there still the need, even more so, for at least the intellectual, and I would think more and more everyone, to abstract himself from being with and have time for reflection and for becoming, let's say, an individual rather than simply a conformist mass man?
Well, intellectuals don't necessarily require privacy. They need the stimulus of intellectual conversation. And
Well,
they can,
think,
yes,
certainly.
but you can do a great deal of thinking in the course of a prolonged dialogue with able people. And,
But not a dialogue with television.
That is precisely where I'm with you. Can we really be thinking, except at the time when we've stopped looking?
This is a good time, I think, to bring up a point that when any new form comes into the foreground of things, we naturally look at it through the old stereos.
Yes,
we can't help that. This is normal, and we're still trying to see how will our previous political and educational patterns persist under television. We're just trying to fit the old things into the new form, instead of asking, what is the new form going to do to all the assumptions we had before? This is not necessarily good.
We are all, I think all of us here learn to read, and we therefore protect books. But in the books we can read that when the book came in, it was denounced because people were being to study from books, and they said, well, how can you study from books without the authority of the teacher there? Now we say, how can you have television in the schoolroom without the authority of the book? I see that, but I'm not sure that there doesn't come a point when the enormity, I was going to say, the vast amount of what we can get from our new media doesn't really, to an extent, make it unnecessary to think deeply and maybe difficult to think. I'm dubious.
There's another point, too, here. It seems to me that with television or with film, it's moving along at a continuous speed. In other words, you haven't any way of checking it. Now, with a book, you can check it. You can go back. You've got a kind of record.
Yeah.
And we can't assume that a person is going to get a videotape or is going to arrange to have this film rerun in the theater. So you don't get a chance to check certain of these new media. You will just have to take it as it comes along.
On the other hand, the degree to which, when reading, that you are in the hands of an author, the degree to which he merely carries you along for a ride, passively, has always been bypassed and not discussed by book readers. They have the illusion of being engaged in great private intellectual discovery. Actually, they're going for a ride.
I begin to see here that we're talking about the importance of whoever the individual is who's in front of these media. He's got to be active in his response, which suggests something that Seldes likes to point out, that we ought to be doing something in classrooms at all levels to make, let's say, more discriminating consumers out of people, so that they don't just look at this instrument, but they react positively to it.
I want a race of critics. At what age they should begin, I don't know. But I think you can't begin too early.
Well, I
We
think
have, I think, in North America, education generally, we have not encouraged criticism 16 years and after. The Europeans have always stressed criticism as a value in the young after 16.
it's
After
quite clear,
16.
gentlemen, we've raised a lot of questions, and we're not going to answer them in one short discussion.
Surely we must, it's very valuable to get these things out there for inspection, to know what are the relevant issues.
Right. This I would agree.
And reproof, possibly, if necessary.
Cut. Well, I hope we can pick this up at some future date, because we're just now getting into...
The important subject matter that's
well,
involved.
thank you all very much for participating.
One of the big flips that's taking place in our time is the changeover from the eye to the ear. And most of us, having grown up in a visual world, are now suddenly confronted with the problems of living in an acoustic world, which is, in effect, a world of simultaneous information. The visual world has very peculiar properties, and the acoustic world has quite different properties. The visual world, which belongs to the old 19th century, and which had been around for quite a while, say from the 16th century anyway, the visual world has the properties of being a sort of continuous and connected and homogeneous, all parts more or less alike, and static. Things stayed put. If you had a point of view, that stayed put. The acoustic world, which is the electric world of simultaneity, has no continuity, no homogeneity, no connections, and no stasis. Everything is changing. So that's quite a big shift. I mean, to move from one of those worlds to the other is a very big shift. It's the same shift that Alice in Wonderland made, you know, when she went through the looking glass. She moved out of the visual world into the acoustic world when she went through the looking glass. Now, to explain a bit about the implications of this rather large shift, it concerns the whole problem of learning and teaching, and social life and politics and entertainment. I'm going to try to tie it into some of those places, but first I will try to make it a little bit more meaningful about how we became visual in the first place. There's only one part of the world that ever did go visual, and that is the Western Greco-Roman Hellenistic world. And about 500 BC, something happened which made it possible to flip out of the old acoustic world, which was the normal one of the tribal Greek society, the Homeric world. Something happened which flipped them out of the old Homeric world of the bards into this new, rational, philosophically logical, connected, private, individualistic, civilized world. And that thing is called the phonetic alphabet. Now, the phonetic alphabet has really, its origins are by no means clear at all. All we know is what it did to people. The phonetic alphabet has a very peculiar set of characteristics which are not shared by any other alphabet on this planet. The phonetic alphabet, the one that you all call the ABCs, has a very peculiar structure. It is made up of phonemes, that is, bits that are meaningless. The 26 letters of our alphabet have no meaning at all. Now, they're called phonemes because that in linguistic terms means the smallest possible meaningless bit. Now, all the other alphabets of the world, the Hebrew and the Arabic and the Hindu, the Chinese and so on, all of those alphabets are morphemic. The bits they are made of have meaning, some meaning, however small. Now, one of the peculiar things that happened with the phonetic alphabet was that the people who used it underwent a kind of fission. Their sensory life exploded, and the visual part of it was cut off from the kinetic, acoustic, and tactile parts. In all the other parts of the world where writing is employed, the visual life has always remained associated with the acoustic life and the tactile life and the kinetic life. The Chinese ideogram is a wonderful instrument of unified sensations. It is so richly unified that most people in our 20th century have begun to study it very carefully as a corrective to our highly specialized alphabet. One of the results of the use of the phonetic alphabet was that Euclid could indicate the properties of visual space in his geometry. Visual space, unlike any other of the sensory spaces, visual space is pretty well taken care of by Euclid, who explored most of its dimensions. You've heard of non-Euclidean geometries. Well, in the electric age, the non-Euclidean geometries have come back and Euclid has been put aside. But with the arrival of Euclid and visual space, you got a very strange possibility which Plato seized upon, and Plato developed his highly systematized philosophy, even more systematized later by Aristotle, his philosophy of the ideas, and the idea of rational control of the passions and of the world of nature. Now, this Platonic universe of abstract truth and abstract ideas is inconceivable without the phonetic alphabet. This alphabet gave people some very strange habits too. It filled people with the idea of imperial domination. Western man, with his alphabet, has always felt it mandatory that he impose it upon all other people. He must spread civilization by spreading literacy in all directions. Now, the Romans were the great implementers of this technology. They seized upon this form of writing to codify their laws and to make them uniformly applicable to all men. The idea that civilization, meaning a visually organized set of rules and laws for men in general, the idea that such a thing should be spread to all nations coincided with the rise of Christianity. As far as I know, Christianity has exactly nothing to do with the Greco-Roman idea of civilization. And so it is very mysterious that Christianity should have undertaken the job of spreading Greco-Roman alphabet. At the present time, the church is very doubtful about the matter of spreading Greco-Roman ideas any further than they've gone, and the third world doesn't want them. The third world doesn't want Greco-Roman Hellenistic institutions. The third world being the non-literate world. So it's helpful to know the origins of the alphabet and of civilization and rationality in that sense, because we have come in the 20th century to the end of that road. And it's a considerable revolution to have been through 2,500 years of phonetic literacy, only to encounter the end of the road. Right now, the people in this room are making the decision whether or not we're going to have any more literacy or any more civilization in the 20th century, or whether it's going to stop right here. One of the strange implications of the phonetic alphabet is private identity. Before literacy, before phonetic literacy, there had been no private identity. There had only been the tribal group. Homer knows nothing about private identity. Homer's world of the acoustic epic, the tribal encyclopedia of memorized wisdom, which Eric Havelock has reported so ably in his preface to Plato. The Homeric epics were part of this acoustic wisdom that preceded literacy and which were phased out by literacy. Homer was wiped off by literacy. Homer had been the educational establishment of the Greeks for centuries. An educated Greek was one who had memorized Homer, who could sing it to his guitar or harp and perform it in public. He was a gentleman and a free man. Along came the phonetic alphabet, and it says, and Plato seized upon it and said, let us abandon Homer and go for rational education. Plato's war on the poets was not a war on poetry, but a war on the oral tradition of education. Now today, everyone in this room is being subjected to a new form of oral education. Literacy is still officially the educational establishment, but unofficially the oral forms are coming up very fast. This is the meaning of rock. It is a kind of education based upon an oral tradition, an acoustic experience which is quite strangely remote from literacy. I will be glad to come back to the whole problem of rock in its relation to the modern city and the modern society. It's a very big subject, and it is not very much studied, but rock is not something that is merely stuck onto the entertainment card as an extra item. Rock is a kind of central oral form of education which threatens the whole educational establishment. If Homer was wiped out by literacy, literacy can be wiped out by rock. We're playing the old story backwards, but you should know what the stakes are. The stakes are civilization and versus tribalism, and groupism, private identity versus corporate identity, and private responsibility versus the group or tribal mandate. Now, this naturally is going to affect our political life. I'll come on to that shortly. This is really just by way of an opening theme. I want to mention, by way of explaining my own approach to these matters, that my kind of study in communication is really a study of transformation, whereas information theory and all the existing theories of communication that I know of are theories of transportation. all the official theories of communication studied in the schools of North America are theories of how you move data from point A to point B to point C with minimal distortion. That is not what I study at all. Information theory I understand and I use, but information theory is a theory of transportation, and it has nothing to do with the effects which these forms have on you. It's like a railway train concerned with moving goods along a track, and the track may be blocked, may be interfered with. The problem in communication, transportation theory of communication, is to get the noise, get the interference off the track, let it go through. Many educators think that the problem in education is just to get the information through, get it past the barrier, the opposition of the young, just to move it and keep it going. I have no interest much in that theory. My theory or concern is with what do these media do to the people who use them? What did writing do to the people who invented it and used it? What do the other media of our time do to the people who use it? So mine is a transformation theory, how people are changed by the instruments they employ. And I wish there were a lot more people in this field that I mentioned of transformation, but there are extremely few. And in fact, I would be embarrassed to mention more than 2 or 3. One of the peculiar flips that goes with the change from the acoustic or the visual to the acoustic is a change in joke styles. I'm going to tell you a couple of old-fashioned jokes to show you what I mean. A friend of mine went to Kennedy Airport a few months ago to pick up an Irishman who was coming into New York. And on the way in from the airport, the Irishman was enjoying the advertising as he went along. And he was especially attracted by a sign which read, "Be younger, use X-Lax." And he said, "How about that?" He said, "What is X-Lax?" And his friend said, "We're coming to a drugstore right now. I'm going to get you some." And he popped in and brought out a cake of X-Lax, which the Irishman proceeded to chomp down in toto and with relish. And about a half an hour later, his friend said, "Are you feeling any younger?" And the Irishman says, "Well, I'm not sure, but I've just done something very foolish." I think he said childish. Now that's an old-fashioned joke. It's got a storyline. Another one on that pattern, it concerns a Newfoundland chap who was sitting in an airport waiting for a plane, and he was sitting beside another man who he gradually spoke to. Airports are arranged so that you do not speak to anybody. That is, the chairs are arranged so that you won't be tempted to even notice anybody around you. This is a carefully arranged ploy. Anyway, he spoke to this man and he said, "What do you do?" And the Newfoundlander said, "I'm a rancher. I have 40 acres in Newfoundland and I grow a great variety of things there. And it keeps me very busy." And he said then in turn, "What do you do?" And the Texan, who was the other chap, said, "I'm a rancher too." And the Newfoundlander said, "How big is your ranch?" "Well," said the Texan, "if we got in my car about now and drove till sunset, we'd still be on my ranch." And the Newfie said, "Well, you know, I had a car like that once." Now that's the old stuff. The one-liner joke, which has taken the place of the storyline, has no plot at all. It's instantaneous. Easy glum, easy glow. That's the whole thing. Easy glum, easy glow. Or I may be crazy, but I'm not far from it. That's all the attention span that you're supposed to have anymore. if Nixon had been the captain of the Titanic, what would he have said to the passengers? He would have said, ladies and gentlemen, we're stopping for ice. Now, these are one-liners. The British Empire is the empire in which the sun never sets because you cannot trust an Englishman in the dark. One-liners are everywhere, and they have taken the place of the old storyline. Storyline goes, by the way, in the same way in music, melody has given place to the new rock forms. Instead of a tune which goes on and on, you have simply the broken and fragmented harmonics and juxtapositions of rhythm. Abstract music. Abstract art, abstract music is an art in which you pull out the connections. I understand that you're going to have a sculpture by Picasso on this campus. And abstract sculpture or abstract art is an art in which there is no visual component. All you have is the acoustic, tactile, kinetic form. Corbusier, the great architect, said, architecture is best appreciated at night, in the dark, where you can feel the thrust and the forces at work in the building. This is not visual. Now, Cubism is an art form in which you are given simultaneously the underneath, the outside, the top, and the bottom of an object, giving it simultaneously in one level. To have all sides simultaneously is not visual, it is acoustic and tactile. So abstract art is an art in which they have pulled out the visual connections. And that began about 1900. It was about the same time that the physicists pulled out the connections in matter. Quantum mechanics, 1900, Max Planck pulled out all the connections in matter and gave us quantum theory. Quantum theory is simply physics minus the connections. And it's quite easily understood, even by scientists. But don't think they don't have their troubles, because one of the problems of Western visual man is that he tries to translate everything into visual terms. It is very difficult for a Western man to take things except in a visual, connected, rational mode. Modern physicists report all their findings in Newtonian terms, which are the old-fashioned visual language. One of the peculiarities of modern physics is it still uses the old Newtonian language. Newton was all visual. Everything was classified, connected, continuous. Modern physics has many troubles with the visual problem and the acoustic problem, and they don't know whether, for example, to have a particle theory or a wave theory of matter. And a particle theory of matter tends to be visual, and a wave theory tends to be kinetic. But modern physics is divided into the different sensory modes of man. And many members of the top physics world are quite unable to understand some of the visual aspects or the non-visual aspects of their own field. They're very good at maintaining the general decorum and the conventional respectability of their clan, but in fact they are divided by severe strife within. Speaking of the flips, there's a story that exists somewhere between the storyline and the one-liner is the Norman Mailer story at Berkeley. A few months ago, he was addressing a women's lib group, and he said to them, "Everybody in this hall who regards me as a male chauvinist pig, hiss." And they all hissed very loudly. And he turned to the chairman and he said, "Obedient little bitches, aren't they?" Well, this brings up you might ask, there are two things that raises. The new journalism versus the old, and women's lib. The old journalism used to try to give an objective picture of a situation by giving the pro and the con. Objective journalism meant giving both sides at once. It was strangely assumed that there were two sides to every case. It never occurred to them there might be 40 sides or 1,000 sides. No, two sides, pro and con. And suddenly this form of journalism disappeared, and the new journalism popped in, represented by Truman Capote, Norman Mailer, and many others, Tom Wolfe. The new journalism doesn't give you any side. It just immerses you in the feeling of the whole situation. So it just plunges you into the feeling of being at the convention or being at the fire, being somewhere. And it began with that famous phrase, something funny happened on the way to the forum. A happening is not a point of view. A happening is all sides at once and everybody involved in it. A Mardi Gras is a happening. You cannot have objective journalism about Mardi Gras. You just have to immerse. Well, Mailer was one of the authors of the new journalism of immersion without any point of view, no objectivity, just subjectivity, and he subheaded his Armies of the Night, fiction as history, history as fiction. So the new journalism, quite frankly, regards itself as a form of fiction, not objectivity at all. I think you'll find the new politics is in the same position. The old politics had parties, policies, planks, opposition. The new politics is concerned only with images. The problem in the new politics is to find the right image. So search committees are formed to find the candidates who have the right image. Manhunting has become a great big business, both in the military world and in the commercial world and the political world. Image hunting is the new thing, and policies no longer matter, because whether your electric light is provided by Republicans or Democrats is rather unimportant compared to the service of light and power and all the other kinds of services that go with our cities. Service environments have taken the place of political policies. Or so it seems. Now, remember, I should always add at anything I say that is the way it seems at the moment. Now, the Mailer thing apropos women's lib has this rather large implication. Women's lib is not like the old suffragette thing about votes for women. Women's lib is not an attempt to find a better, a more just setup for women to be employed in. Women's lib concerns a tremendous change that's taking place in the entire nature of work. Just as education has undergone strange changes, so has work. The Japanese Sony plant years ago developed a system whereby all the workers could bring their children to the plant and send them to school. If they were infants, there was daycare, and if they were school age, they went to school. The Sony plant in Tokyo educated not only the children, but educated them in university level, and any of the workers who wanted could also go to university. the plant became itself a kind of a playground, and learning and play and work became one thing. Now that isn't too hard to do in Japan because they are a tribal people and live according to family rules. Nobody ever got fired from a Japanese plant. He's part of the family. Now, this tribalism, which they take for granted, is something that they're now trying to get rid of, is something toward which we tend to be moving. But at present, in our own world of work, jobs are giving place to role-playing. Job holding is giving way to role-playing because at electric speed, it is impossible to specialize. This is one of the problems in education. Subjects become very, very dubious as a form of learning. The interdisciplinary takes on more and more meaning. Media study is interdisciplinary study. Isolated subjects in the curriculum have become almost a menace to education. But in the same way, work, the specialized job, has become impossible in a big plant or in a big business of any sort. It is more and more necessary to know the overall pattern of the operation. In these Japanese plants, like the Sony plants, the workers were consulted upon the kinds of innovation, the kinds of products they would make, on any new developments in the manufacturing process, and they were also consulted on the pricing and marketing of all these products. And that meant everybody in the plant was consulted, not somebody. There was total participation on the part of the workers in the whole operation. The Japanese today are introducing Western literacy into their own culture, are spending $6 billion at the present moment in Japan to get rid of their own alphabet and put in our alphabet. Little do they know what is going to happen to them or to us as a result. But the alphabetic man is a very aggressive man and a very specialized man. So the Japanese world is likely to manifest enormous increase of energy and aggression when they get our alphabet installed. It will also wipe out their whole culture. Scrub it right off. That is, their own phonetic, or rather ideogrammic, forms of writing and culture will be destroyed. Now, if China follows the same course and appears to be about to do that, then the transformation of the Chinese world would be very rapid, 20 years. They would flip out of their culture, wipe off their whole ancient culture in 20 years, and become incredibly aggressive and specialized and goal-oriented, because the specialist man always has a goal. The visual man has a goal in life. The ear man never has a goal. He just wants to do his thing wherever he is. So if the Chinese or the Japanese were to take on our alphabet seriously, they would be in great trouble, and we would too. I don't think they understand what's involved. Now, apropos women's lib, the electric world, because it does not favor specialism, does favor women. Men are naturally specialists compared to women. Men are very brittle and unadaptable people compared to women. Women have had through the centuries to adapt to men rather than vice versa. So the specializing, which used to be taken for granted in modern industry, has now become very, very shaky, and role-playing has taken over from job holding in big business. Role-playing means having several jobs simultaneously, or being able to move rapidly from one job to another. A man, a good actor, can play many parts. So women's lib is really a reply to the new electric conditions of employment in which huge information is available simultaneously to everybody. In the electric world, the simultaneity of information is acoustic in the form that it comes from all directions at once. You hear it from all directions at once. Electric information comes from all directions at once. And when information comes from all directions simultaneously, you are living in an acoustic world. It doesn't matter whether you're listening or not. The fact is you're getting this acoustic pattern. Now, when people become acoustically affected, they no longer have goals. They settle down into role playing. Some of you may have seen this show called Upstairs, Downstairs on Sunday nights, in which you go down to the servants' quarters. Upstairs is the Forsyte Saga, downstairs the servants. In the servants' quarters, people are playing roles. Upstairs in the Forsyte world of literacy, they are pursuing goals. Downstairs in the servants' quarters in England, the servants had no goals, they just had a role, which was static. But it was very dramatic, very involving, and very fulfilling. Now, role-playing is a very different thing from goal-seeking. And in the electric time, we are moving very much in that direction. The reason that most of you in this room find it difficult to imagine a goal in life is simply that you're living in an electric world where everything happens at once. It's hard to have a fixed point of view in a world where everything is happening simultaneously. It is hard to have an objective in a world that is changing faster than you can imagine the objective being fulfilled. Women's lib, therefore, has very deep roots in the new technology and is not just a matter of votes for women. It means that the work that is being performed by men today can, in many cases, be done better by women. Another strange effect of this electric environment is the total absence of secrecy. What Nixon refers to as the confidentiality of his role and position is no longer feasible. No form of secrecy is possible at electric speed, whether in the patent world, in the fashion world, or in the political world. The pattern sticks out a mile before anybody says anything about it. At electric speed, everything becomes X-ray. So, Watergate is simply a nice parable or example of how secrecy was flipped into show business. The backroom boys suddenly found themselves on the stage. Political support for election purposes and so on ceases to be possibly confidential or quiet or secret. There's no way of having any form of secrecy in these matters. With the end of secrecy goes the end of monopolies of knowledge. There can no longer be a monopoly of knowledge in learning, education, or in power. Now this, I'm not making value judgments. This would seem to many people a very good thing, and it may well be a very good thing. I'm simply specifying the pattern or the form that occurs when you have instant speed of electric information. You cannot have a monopoly of knowledge such as most learned people had a few years ago. You cannot have it under electric conditions. This applies to all professional life as well as to private life. Ivan Illich has a book called Deschooling, in which he argues that since we now live in a world where the information and answers are all outside the schoolroom, let us close the schools. Why spend the child's time inside a school giving him answers that already exist outside? It's a good question, but his answer or suggestion of closing the schools is somewhat unnecessary, because it is now possible, instead of putting the answers inside the school, to put the questions inside. This might be a good time to mention a little scheme I have for what I call organized ignorance. I've often been puzzled by the fact that the greatest discoveries in the world, when you look back, are perfectly easy. They can be put in a textbook. But the same discovery, when you were looking forward as a problem, impossible. Why is knowledge so easy backwards and so hard forward? Well, it's obvious that this is true, because there isn't anything that has been discovered that can't be taught quite easily. Why is it so hard to discover it? Well, I thought, suppose the cancer experts came to the studio with their problem, set up a model of their experiments and their procedures in studying cancer, and said, we have got to this point and we cannot get any further. They broadcast that to 1 million people at once. It is obvious that there'd be one person in 1 million who would see there was no problem at all. In any problem whatever, 1 in 1 million would see no problem. The real problem is, how do you reach this guy who sees the absence of the problem? Now, let us ask another question. Why is it that the man 1 in 1 million says there is no problem? This person is inevitably and naturally untaught, ignorant of all scientific procedures and all science. The scientist has great trouble looking forward past his problem because his knowledge gets in the way. It is only the very ignorant person who can get past that problem, because he is not fogged over by knowledge. When you're looking for new answers to new questions, it is knowledge itself that blocks progress. It is knowledge that creates real ignorance, just as wealth creates poverty. Knowledge creates ignorance. Every time a new discovery is made, enormous new areas of ignorance are opened up. One of the greatest human discoveries, the automatic cybernetic governor on a steam engine, was made by an 8-year-old boy who had the job of pulling the steam cock, and every time the big wheel went around, he pulled the steam cock to let the steam out. He wanted to play marbles. He tied the string to the wheel and made one of the greatest inventions of all human history. Now, the engineers who made the steam engine could not possibly have seen this simple gimmick. Only an ignorant kid who wanted to play marbles could see such things. Now, the greatest discoveries in human history are of that kind. Another strange circumstance attending all discovery and all investigation is this: the effects come before the causes. Without any exception, in every human development, in every discovery, all the effects come before the cause or the discovery itself. So that when the discovery is finally made, everybody says, well, anybody could have seen that. The time was right. So about the time somebody discovers a telephone, there are 1,000 people who invent the telephone. And then the law courts are filled with suits for generations. Darwin and Wallace discovered evolution at the same time without any personal acquaintance. But at the present time, one of the effects that is heaped up a mile high for which no cause has yet appeared, but a cause will shortly appear, one of the effects is anti-gravity. At the present time, we have an enormous amount of anti-gravitational effect and activity, helicopters, airplanes, astronauts, many things, but we don't have the cause, we just have the effects. Within our lifetimes, or your lifetimes, the cause of anti-gravity, a simple gimmick, will present itself, and all things will levitate instantly. The problem will be how to hold things down on the ground. But this is obvious as your being there or my being here. The effects are here, the causes will be here shortly. The bicycle presented all the causes of the motor car, all the effects of the motor car just before the motor car. The bicycle paved the way for the motor car. Everything, the tires, the chains, the ball bearings, all the manufacturing problems were solved by the bicycle before the motor car was ever thought of. But the roads and the services all arrived first, the motor car arrived last. At the present moment, the motor car is on the way out, not because of oil shortage, but because of something quite different. The motor car, as a vehicle, had an enormous function to perform in American life. It provided the ultimate form of privacy and the means of going outside to be alone. North Americans are the only people in the world who go outside to be alone and inside to be with people. In every other country in the world, including the Eskimo world, people go outside to be with people and inside to be alone. Why did Americans ever hit upon this weird reverse pattern? Well, the answer is available. Americans came to this continent to subdue nature fast and furious. They tamed it, they subdued it, they crushed it, and they turned it into the enemy. So naturally, you can read about it in Moby Dick or in Hawthorne or any of our literature. Naturally, Americans regard the outside as the enemy and the inside as the friend. Whereas all the other continents in the world regard the outside as the friend and the inside as a place of hostility and for defense only. All doors are closed in the European house. The European family lives in seclusion and privacy inside. There is no privacy in the American home. That is why you have to get a grant if you want to study. So you can leave home. But no, this is a weird pattern, and it's very important to understand it because it isn't over. The motor car, providing this superior means of going outside to be alone, and incidentally going along with a great dislike of public transit in America, because public transit is where you go outside to be with people. Very distasteful. The motor car, as the supreme form of privacy, has been threatened, in fact superseded by television. Television brings the outside inside and takes the inside outside. It really pulls the rug out or the highway out from under the car. It deprives the car of its rationale and its meaning. If the car had not lost its real meaning in our lives, there would be no oil crisis whatever. That is, nobody would even dream of allowing the oil crisis to occur. The oil crisis, of course, is a promotional deal. There's no question. I mean, that's well known. But it is something that could not have happened if the car had not already been obsolesced. The car has lost its place in the heart of the people. That doesn't mean it's going to disappear overnight. Not at all. All it means is the effects of the car are disappearing. And privacy and service environment are part of the effects. When I say the medium is the message, I'm saying that the motor car is not a medium. The medium is the highway, the factories, and the oil companies. That is the medium. In other words, the medium of the car is the effects of the car. When you pull the effects away, the meaning of the car is gone. The car as an engineering object has nothing to do with these effects. The car is a figure in a ground of services. It's when you change the ground that you change the car. The car does not operate as the medium, but rather as one of the major effects of the medium. So the medium as a message is not a simple remark, and I've always hesitated to explain it. It really means a hidden environment of services created by an innovation. And the hidden environment of services is the thing that changes people. It is the environment that changes people, not the technology. But to come back then momentarily to the problem of Illich and the problem of organized ignorance. Illich says we must close our schools because the answers are now outside, and let the kids go back to work and run around the community and get an education. I'm suggesting that the answer is not that, but to put the questions in the classroom and to start a real dialogue there. Organized ignorance as a way of bypassing the problem of knowledge as confusion and as block to discovery brings me on to the subject of Sputnik and the laws of the media. When Sputnik went up in August 17, 1957, it put the planet inside a man-made environment for the first time. Spaceship Earth has no passengers, only crew. Sputnik transformed the planet into a Spaceship Earth with a programmed problem. Ecology became the name of the game from the moment of Sputnik. Nature ended. The planet became an art form inside a man capsule. And life will never be the same on this planet again. Nature ended and art took over. Ecology is art. We now have to confront the need for an ecology of media themselves. It's not just raw materials, but the man-made materials too that now have to be harmonized and resolved in their interaction. Mr. Schwartz, Tony Schwartz, in his book of The Responsive Chord, explains this very tricky problem about television as a new environmental medium by saying that the TV image uses the eye as an ear. It's a way of drawing attention to the fact that the TV image has a very different effect on your psychic life than the movie image. And therefore, educationally speaking, TV has very strange consequences and could never be used as a mere transportation device. The laws of the media, which are like the Medes and the Persians, are quite simply this: that every medium exaggerates some function. Spectacles exaggerate or enlarge or enhance the visual function. They obsolesce another function. They retrieve a much older function, and they flip into the opposite form. The simplest form I know to illustrate this principle, which works for all media, whether it's a teaspoon, corsets, or motor car, the simplest form is money. Money increases transactions, it obsolesces barter, it retrieves potlatch or conspicuous waste, and it flips into credit card, which is not money at all. Now, every medium enhances, starts out by exaggerating something that we all have, and then finally flipping into the opposite of itself. The motor car flipped into airplane, but first came the bicycle. The Wright brothers were bicycle men. The gyroscopic principle of the bicycle made possible the airplane. The hula hoop arrived just before the miniskirt. The hula hoop was a tribal dance which preceded the tribal costume. The effects come first. The causes later. Now, the laws of the media, I simply mention in passing. I could spend a long time on them. I simply mention them in passing because they are at least a hope that we can reduce this confusion to some sort of order.
That was a mean trick. I was relaxing over there, hoping for a nice long introduction. And there was a man who got up to a podium a while ago, who, one of these very elaborate auditoriums where they had every type of gimmick, and he was fumbling around, and just about the time the chairman was saying, "This man needs no introduction," he pressed a button on the podium, and he disappeared. He went down out of sight. And the chairman said, as I was saying, he needs no introduction, he has disappeared. But I'm afraid I have no easy out like that. I was in Barcelona a few weeks ago, and I had a translator who was very good, but I discovered something that might be of some relevance. You cannot translate jokes into another language. Now, the reason, I think, is that a joke really requires a hidden ground of grievances. And the joke is only a figure sitting out front. You know, remember the streakers? They had a kind of grievance, and it's now called just a passing fanny. But the grievance behind the streaker performance can't be translated. You cannot verbalize the kinds of grievances that prompted the streakers to go into action. And neither can you, even the simplest jokes cannot be provided with a ground which makes the joke plausible. So I had in mind to tell them a few of our Newfie stories by way of introducing them to Canada. And I thought of stories like the Newfie who went into the bank to cash a check, asked for identification, produced a pocket mirror, and looked at it and said, "Yep, that's me, all right." Now, why is the Newfie, what is the grievance? What grievance have we got against Newfies? If we didn't have a grievance, there wouldn't be any story. The same is true in any other language. I'll illustrate for some other ethnic areas like Paris, and in a minute. But the Newfie stories happen to be our kind of bundle at the moment. And there's the one about the Newfie who was asked by a sociologist inquiring at the door, "Do you have any other brothers or sisters?" He said, "Yes, I have a brother at Harvard." "Oh, what's he studying at Harvard?" "Oh, he's not studying at Harvard, they're studying him." Or on top of a Newfie ladder, there is written on the rung, "Stop here." On the bottom of every Newfie beer bottle, I've been told this is true, it is written, "Open the other end." How would a Newfie have handled Watergate? Same way. So on. Now, these jokes, some of them try to cross borders and move from one area to another. On the other hand, jokes are themselves a very important form of communication, and they go along with certain grievances and irritations which everybody feels. And yet, very little notice is given to them. When I was in Paris a few months ago, the story was going about the man who felt that he was alienated and alone in the world. He walked up, jumped off the top of his high-rise. As he was passing the floor of his apartment, he heard the telephone ringing. This is one for Gordy Thompson. the telephone reminding him that there was somebody still in the world beside himself. But that's a sick joke. Now, the sick jokes are a new form of grievance, and just why they should have their vogue is worth looking into. In Moscow, they tell the story about the attempts to set up an American-style nightclub and the failure. I had this story from John Abrams a few months back when he was there. I asked him to bring me back a couple of good Moscow stories, and this was one of them. Having set up this nightclub, it flopped. They had a committee to look into why. They said, how about the food? And the managers explained we had French chefs and cuisine and the best wines and good prices, very reasonable prices. How about the decor, the layout? They said, well, we had Italian designers with Hollywood consultants. And how about the girls? They were absolutely tops. Every one of them party members since 1917. And so you see where the grievance is, in Russia. Now, you cannot have a joke without a grievance. And this kind of thing has led to the development of one-liners in our world. You know, the one-liner is for people of very short attention span. They won't stay around for you to tell them a story. You have to work fast. You flip in with a single gag in one era and out another. And this is where it's at. Now, there's this one-liner about Zeus, who says to his fellow god, Narcissus, watch yourself. Or you can't see the writing on the wall until your back's up against it. And this is, they're simply endless. Politics is shooting from the lip. These responses to grievance, to situations, lead to much larger situations, such as our horror movies, our vampire movies, and our general cult of horror. This is a response to situations of the media which people feel are involving them, embedding them. The Exorcist is an account of how it feels to live in an electric age, how it feels to be completely taken over by alien forces and hidden powers. The Exorcist was an account of what it feels like, I believe, to live in the electric age. You feel you've been obsessed or possessed. And of course, there is the gag, if you do not pay your exorcist, you will be repossessed. However, the dropout is a figure of our time. He is the person who is trying to get in touch. The dropout is when you get uptight, you have to let go in order to get back in touch. To get in touch, strange phrase, when a wheel and an axle are playing along together, as long as there's a nice interval between the wheel and the axle, they're in touch. When the interval gets too small or too big, they lose touch. The wheel is either in a hot box, uptight, or else seized up, or else falls apart. This situation of keeping in touch requires this interplay, this interface, which is a kind of interval of resonance. Touch is actually not connection, but interval. It's when you touch something, you have a little space between yourself and that thing which resonates. And that is play. And without play, there cannot be any creative work or any creative activity in any field at all. This leads on to the theme of violence as a response to situations in which you feel you have lost identity, in which you have been ripped off by too rapid changes, where you have suddenly been flipped from one situation to another without warning, and you suddenly are minus your identity. You don't know who you are. You don't know where you are. This leads to a response of violence. Incidentally, in an ordinary game of an ordinary football game, the members present in a public of that sort are nobodies. If you are sitting there with Charlie Chaplin or the Duke of Edinburgh, he is a nobody and you are a nobody. Anybody at a ball game is a nobody. Now, what is the compensation that people expect for becoming nobodies? They expect violence. And so sport provides a systematized, organized form of violence which compensates the participants, the audience, for being nobodies. Now, the nobody in real life is a person who becomes quite intractable, quite violent, as a way of rediscovering who am I and how do I reestablish my image, myself, in this world. So that our favorite forms of entertainment tend toward that direction, whether it's westerns or whodunits or various horror movies and so on. These are movies in which people are questing for their identity. In our time, one of the strange things that's happening is not unrelated to that. Having come out of a very visual age with organized points of view, positions, jobs, attitudes, we're suddenly confronted with an instantaneous, simultaneous world in which there are no familiar boundaries. Moving from the old hardware world of 19th century and industrial or first world technology, moving from first world technology of the familiar productive and industrial type into a world of instant information and design and pattern is a flip from a visual world to an acoustic world. I suggest that you keep in mind the possibility or the aspect of our simultaneous, instantaneous time as essentially acoustic, not visual, no point of view possible to the ear. To the world of the simultaneous and the instantaneous, there is no sequence, there is no logic, there is only the simultaneous, instantaneous burst, breakthrough. I was in a plane a few days ago which was struck by lightning. And there was suddenly a bang and a flash, and the stewardess casually said, "We've just been hit by lightning." This never happened before, but to me, but apparently everyday occurrence to her. To a person who hadn't a clue as to what had happened, it would be rather startling. But the world of the instantaneous, the simultaneous, is the world in which we live. What is called the generation gap represents a kind of division between people who grew up in the visual era of the first world and of the industrial complex, a world of jobs and a world of points of view and policies and attitudes, and suddenly a world in which the children of those people were brought up in the acoustic, simultaneous, instantaneous world of television. This had happened in a smaller degree in the 1920s with radio. The radio generation was somewhat alienated, dislocated. It was called the lost generation by Gertrude Stein. "You are all a lost generation," she said in 1920. The radio generation was relatively, though, intact compared to the TV generation. Maybe we'll have opportunities to look further into that. But the generation gap between parents who grew up in the old first world and their children who grew up in the fourth world. The fourth world is the electric world that goes around the first, second, third worlds. The first world is the industrial world of 19th century. The second world is Russian socialism. The third world is the rest of the world where industrial institutions have yet to establish themselves. And the fourth world is a world that goes around all of them. The fourth world is us, is the electric world, is the computer world, the instantaneous in communication world. The fourth world, you see, can come to Africa before the second or first world. Radio came there long ago and began to penetrate their institutions and their psyches long ago. And radio went to China long before anything else from the West, and so with India and other continents. The coming of the fourth world, the electric instantaneous world, has been completely ignored by the journalists and by the Marxists. By the way, Marx, I'm not trying to undermine him, I'm simply pointing out the obvious. He was a 19th century man who knew nothing about electricity, nothing about the instantaneous. He was a hardware man of the first world only, and therefore has exactly nothing to say to the fourth world, which is us. And this I simply advert to as a simple and testable fact. Marx had no clue as to what might happen in the fourth world or the instantaneous world of electric information. His entire thought is based upon production and distribution of production, and his conviction was that if everybody could have enough of everything, problems would disappear. It never occurred to them that perhaps the most important commodity in the 20th century would be information and not hardware products. So information is not only our biggest business, but has become education itself. Now, having leaped ahead of myself on a couple of fronts, I'm going to have a look at some of these observations I had intended to mention in other connections. I'm going to mention, my topic is man and media. I'm going to mention an aspect of media which I've been working on a good deal lately. And I have a preface to a new book which begins, all of man's artifacts of language, of laws, of ideas, hypotheses, tools, clothing, computers, all of these are extensions of our physical bodies. Hans Haas, in The Human Animal, sees this human power to create additional organs as an enormity from the evolutionary standpoint, an advance laden with unfathomable consequences. The laws of the media are observations on the operation and effects of human artifacts on man and society, since, as Hans Haas further notes, a human artifact is not merely an implement for working upon something, but an extension of our body effected by artificial additional organs, to which, to a greater or lesser degree, we owe our civilization. Haas considers the advantages of our bodily extensions as A, no need of constant nourishment, thus saving energy. B, they can be discarded or stored rather than carried around, a further saving of energy. They are exchangeable, enabling man to specialize to play multiple roles. And when carrying a spear, he can be a hunter, or with a paddle, he can move across the sea. All of these instruments can be shared communally. E, they can be made in community by specialists, giving rise to handicrafts. One thing overlooked by Hans Haas is the absence of biological or psychological means of coping with the effects of our own technical ingenuity in creating new organs. The problem is clearly indicated in some simians in man's presumptuous brain, when he says that when, about 500,000 years ago, man began slowly to embark upon the road to cultural advance, an entirely new situation arose. The use of implements and the control of fire introduced artifacts of which the cortex could avail itself for purposes of living. These artifacts had no relationship whatever to the organization of the body and could therefore not be integrated into the functioning of the brainstem. The brainstem, man's great regulating center, the diencephalon, continued to function just as if the artifacts were non-existent. But as the diencephalon is also the organ in which the instincts are generated, the earliest humans found themselves faced with a very old problem in a new garb. Their instinctive behavior ceased to be appropriate in the new situations which the cortex created by using artifacts. Just as in the pre-mammalian reptiles, the new environment in the trees rendered many ancient reflexes pointless, the new artificial environment which man began to build for himself at the dawn of culture made many of his animal reflexes useless. What Simians is saying is that our natural responses to media and to technology are irrelevant, that we cannot trust our instincts or our natural physical responses to new things. They will destroy us. How are we to bypass or offset the merely physical response to new technology and new environments created by new technologies? This problem has not been raised by anybody, except that we have to live with it every day. Edgar Allan Poe has a story called The Descent into the Maelstrom, which had tremendous influence in the 19th century on the poets and symbolists like Baudelaire and Flaubert and others. In The Descent into the Maelstrom, Poe imagines the situation in which a sailor who has gone out on a fishing expedition is caught by not watching the turn of the tide in a huge maelstrom or whirlpool, and he sees that his boat will be sucked down into this thing. He begins to study the action of the storm. He observes that some things disappear and some things reappear. By studying the things that reappear, to which he attaches himself to one of these, he saves himself. Pattern recognition in the midst of a huge, overwhelming, destructive force is the way out of the maelstrom. The huge vortices of energy created by our media present us with similar possibilities of evasion, of consequences, of destruction. By studying the pattern of the effects of this huge vortex of energy in which we're involved, it may be possible to program a strategy of evasion and survival. The survival cannot be trusted to natural response or natural instinct, since the brain stem is not provided with any means of responding to man-made environments. Our diencephalon, our huge evolutionary structure of nerves and brainstem, evolved over long periods of time, was finished, ended its development long before the first technology. Long before fire or clothing, this brainstem had completed its programming. And so with the coming of fire and clothing and weapons, the brainstem is unable to respond relevantly to any of these events. The artist would seem to have been given to us as a providential means of bridging the gap between evolution and technology. The artist is able to program the sensory life or reprogram the sensory life in a way which gives you a navigational chart to get out of the maelstrom created by your own ingenuity. The role of the artist in that regard to man and the media is simply survival. I think I'm going to skip a bit, and I'm going to read a passage from Anthony Storr in The Human Aggression, in which he observes, "It is obviously true that most bomber pilots are no better, no worse than other men. The majority of them, given a can of petrol and told to pour it over a child of 3 and ignite it, would probably disobey the order. Yet put a decent man in an aeroplane a few hundred feet above a village, and he will kill without compunction, drop high explosives, and napalm inflict appalling pain and injury on men, women, and children. The distance between him and the people he's bombing make them into an impersonal target, no longer human beings like himself with whom he can identify." This is characteristic situation. That bomber pilot is really very much like the person introducing any new technology using ordinary human business resources and existing institutional means. None of these people ever consider what will be the impact or the effect of what they do when they pull that trigger. Quite apart from the use of weaponry at a distance, there is the effect of changes in man himself which result from using his own devices to create environments of service. Any new service environment, such as that created by railways or motor cars or telegraph or radio, deeply modify the very nature and image of the people who use them. Radical changes of identity happening in very sudden, brief intervals of time have proved more deadly and destructive to human values than were wars fought with hardware weapons. In the electric age, the alteration of human identity by new service environments of information have left whole populations without personal or community values to a degree that far exceeds the effects of food and fuel and energy shortages. I'm there suggesting that the Club of Rome is really talking to the old 19th century situation of quantity and hardware
and ignoring completely the effects of software information on the human psyche. The rip-off of human psychic resources by new media may far exceed the dangers involved in energy shortages from hardware. It is hoped that many improvements on this approach will be suggested by the readers of this book. Meantime, I suggest it possible to begin by noticing A, what does the artifact amplify or enhance in the case of any new form of medium or technology? A, what does it enhance? B, what does it obsolesce? And third, what does it bring back from a distant past that was unexpectedly scrapped earlier? And finally, what does it flip into when pushed to the full limit of its power? I'll give you a few examples of this pattern of these four phases or stages in the development of any artifact whatever. I just have in front of me, in isolation from other things, camera. A, it enhances by its snapshotting aggression and private power over people. B, it obsolesces privacy. It retrieves the past as present. It brings back the big game hunter. Bringing him home alive means bringing people home alive. Photographic journalism is very big game hunting. It flips into the public domain. The zipper, the homely zipper. It amplifies the grip, the clasp. It obsolesces the button, the snap. It retrieves long flowing robes, easy to manage, and reverses into Velcro, drape. No clasp, no button, no zipper, no claws at all. The clock amplifies work. Until clock, what we call work was almost impossible to organize. It obsolesces leisure. It retrieves history as art form by fixed chronology, a measurable sequential chronology capable of visual time as measured by the clock. It reverses, when pushed all the way, into the eternal present, a nowness. Electric media in general amplify information range, scope, pushing information into a service environment by simultaneity, obsolesces the visual, the connected, the logical, the rational, retrieves the subliminal, audile, tactile dialogue involvement, brings back, rather, reverses, finally, all hardware into software. The motor car is only worth $10 in hardware terms. It's worth many millions in software terms of design. At electric speeds, the sender is sent. The sender goes onto the air and is instantaneously everywhere without a body.